Okay, welcome back. This is the video in which I make a leaf spring Bowie. And my buddy Levi gave me these leaf springs. He cut them out of his truck or replaced them in his big Chevy van and said, I know you'll do something with these. So he left them in my property. It was really funny because he was right, and I thank him for inspiring me. I wouldn't have done this if he hadn't prompted me and left those in my shop. I'm just using a cutoff wheel here. This is almost quarter-inch, thicker than quarter-inch steel, and that thing feels like it weighs 100 pounds, just that leaf spring set. And so this is very dense, heavy steel, and it's a lot of fun to work with. This is really, I might consider this my first kind of true blacksmith project. I did that knife a year ago, but maybe this is my second, because I did learn a lot of shaping on that project and this one as well. And right here I'm just getting it flat. I'm just trying to flatten it out. I don't really know what I want or what I'm doing. I'm just flattening it out. And Brett was giving me some advice here, is to just shape the tip. And my tendency is just to do reductive sculpting, which is just take what I have and change the shape of it with a saw or whatever. My head fell off there. And that's why I got 10 hammers around the thing. I don't really have a lot of proper forging hammers, but I keep a lot. It's funny, this was Brett's suggestion to cut this off. It looks great on camera, and when this piece shoots across the room, watch. Boink. Right there. Well, boink. It ran across the room and started a fire immediately in a pile of wood. So you hear us curse, and we ran across the room to put the fire out. So blacksmithing can be dangerous if you're in a wood shop. And here I am. I'm really starting to discover shaping the blade. I'm flanging out the bevel. I'm really shaping it nicely as far as I was concerned. It was a real learning experience. Right there, you're watching that happen in my own. I'm like, oh, I just got to mush the whole front of the blade and draw it out. Start to curve the blade. Here I had to keep kind of shaping it because it would have been a big banana shape if I didn't keep shaping it. Just heating up 7-8 inches at a time and then just flattening out the front part of the blade. And oh, it's so nice when it's that red hot. And I really have a lot of fun. Brett picks on me, but to use that little hammer, I like using that hammer. I was at a hammer in a year ago, and I was using a little hammer, and one of the pros comes over and is like, oh, you can't really use that hammer, but I can do whatever I want because it's my creative process. And I like using that little hammer. I was really trying to add texture, which I learned an important lesson. Don't put texture where you're going to grind because it'll all go away. And I'm just using my tomahawk here just to cut that shape close. And I knew I had a lot of grinding to do in this case here. I couldn't put that to the bandsaw because it just would have ruined the bandsaw blade. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to grind it anyway. I'm going to get close. It's not going to really be the shape I want, so let me just plasma cut it and grind it to what I really want. And it's nice to get this skill set of shaping with a grinder. I'm using that 1/4-inch wheel and trying to figure out how to get the most out of it. It's not that easy, but just start grinding the shape into something and just start figuring it out. And now here, this is all just thinking, what do I do now? And I said, oh, the best way to do this is to fly cut it on the Bridgeport. And so I did that. I put it on the Bridgeport and I fly cut it. And right there I'm watching all my beautiful texture disappear. And I'm like, oh, I guess I know now maybe to add it in after I flatten the blade, or make it deeper, or try and flatten the blade out with a flatter before I bring it to the thing. So you see I lost a lot of that texture I wanted to try and keep. But hey, that's why we do these things, is so we can learn how to do it different the next time, or better, or worse, whatever the case might be. But you need a reference point, and that's the most important thing about making anything, is you get a reference point to then do it again a different way, or now you went this direction last time, this time you're going to go that direction. But that looks really nice. I was happy with that side of the knife. I made this knife and I wasn't extremely happy with the overall shape of it. It kind of got a little, I mean, of course I'm going for a joke size, but it got a little hokey looking as far as I was concerned. But Brett talked me back into it, and now I really like it. And this was a technique. I did not know how to put that fuller in there. I know the fuller is supposed to be hammered in, so all you nerds, blacksmith nerds, lay off me. I know that's supposed to be hammered in because it creates the crystalline structure and makes the knife stronger, and it's supposed to be there. It's not necessarily a blood groove. But I needed to put that texture in there, and I wanted to do it, and I didn't know how to do it, so I started to grind it in there. And this is the only thing I could think of, and if I never had this table saw technique, I wouldn't have been able to do it. This is a table saw technique, how to put a scallop, and Toth did a couple of videos on using this technique to make some texture on the front of a cabinet he made. And I said, hey, it should work with steel. Just got to set up the table saw in the right way. And table saw, metaphorically, I'm talking about the grinder. And a friend of mine online suggested, hey, before you harden that thing, take sandpaper to it, smooth it out, get some nice shines in that, because I had been Instagramming a little bit. And just I use a little bit of oil, maybe WD, to lubricate the sanding. When you do that, it removes the granules that are coming off and get out of your way. And now here I'm getting the blade up to sharp, at least just starting to shape it a little bit. I really was just kind of working in the dark here. I didn't know exactly where I was going. I wanted to put a sharp edge on it, but keep that texture. And then I started losing the texture, and I just said, screw it. It's going to be what it's going to be. And I have this Metabo grinder. This is a belt grinder, and I got this years ago. This thing is one of my favorite tools, and it's taken so much abuse. It's broken several times, and right after I used it, I left it on the table, and it broke, and the little plate inside that holds the bottom of the belt broke off. But I also love using files, and I use the Diacom to show where I've been with the file and where I need to go. That's why I like putting the Diacom blue dye on there, so I could see where I've been, where I'm going. Here I'm just making some anchoring for the epoxy for the handle. All right, so now I'm hardening the steel. Brett made this oil tube out of a big piece of 4x4 steel, and we just drop oil in it, and there you go. He hardened his pirate sword in it. And, of course, the very precious tempering, which I must show so that not 6,000 people comment that I didn't do it. I figured it's the most boring part of the process, so why show it? But I must show it so people understand and can sleep at night. So here you go. I'm making the handle, I'm making the sides of the handle. I don't know, there's all kinds of terms I don't know, but whatever it is, I call it the handle to the knife. And each side of the knife, I guess it's called scales. Now I'm just crazy gluing it in place so that I could transfer the drill holes. That's really all I'm doing. I'm drilling the holes through. And now I glue them together or clamp them together and drill. So you see how I use the hole that's in the blade to go to the one side of the handle, to the other side of the handle. And then I start shaping where I can't shape once it's all put together. So that's the inside part by the knife. And I put wood pegs. And it's so funny, 4 people came in the shop and go, that's such a great idea to wood peg it on. But it really wasn't that. It was just so I could temporarily keep things in place. I could have crazy glued them as well, or CA glued them. But the CA glue is a pain in the ass to clean off. So I just wooden peg them together while I'm working on them. And you see here I cut the wooden peg shorter. And now I'm routing out what's going to be the pocket for the wood. And a lot of people were very confused. Why do I have clips on my wrists? Because the brass shavings was shooting up the sleeves of my shirt. So that's why I did that. And I had CA glued down. I heated up to pop it off. And then I make the next one. I was going to put that all in the Bridgeport milling machine and everything, get all fancy. I was like, you know what? I don't feel like going over there. It's in a different location. So I just said, let me see if the router can handle this. And it did. And that's just a regular wooden bit, a 2-flute bit, straight flutes. And now I'm just cleaning up where the router would have kind of left its own sort of personality as opposed to a Bridgeport. And that was it. The whole reason I would have used the Bridgeport is just to get those two sides perfectly flat. And I realized all I needed to do was take 5 minutes with a file. And this is the wood. This is paddock. It was laying in the shop. And you see I actually spliced a piece onto the top of one of the arches because it wasn't wide enough. This is just 5-minute epoxy from West Systems, gluing everything in place. And that thin part of the brass got a little cuppy. You notice it kept bouncing up, so that's why I put the steel weight on it, so it cured overnight, it stayed flat. And this is the next day. Now it's the next day. And I'm getting all my holes aligned. And getting everything in order. There you go. And cleaning it up, and again I wouldn't peg them together so that I could shape them a little bit. And when I do left side, do the right side, do the right side, do the left side, and then they just pull apart gently. More epoxy, and you see I'm putting the epoxy is going to kind of grab into those holes. And once I put this all together with the 2 steel pegs, I got the feeling that it was going to still peel up. I just didn't trust that the glue was going to do all its work from the pegs forward and the pegs backwards. So if you look at a Buck 110, you'll notice sometimes you see little tiny brass rods that just appear in a really worn out knife on the corners. So that's why I was inspired to just do exactly what you see me do here. And I drilled extra holes And a lot of people have this misconception that the holes I drilled were perfectly in line with the ones I drilled under the handle, and that is not the case. How in the world would I know that? I just drilled through everything again. I might have drilled alongside a hole, or I might have drilled through a hole, I might have drilled right on the edge of a hole, I don't know. And these are just brass rod. Actually, I think this is brazing rod. This is 1/8 inch silicone bronze rod we had, and I'm just peening it in there. And silicone, bronze, and brass are a little different colored, so eventually you might notice them eventually. And there you go. And now there's no way that the handle's coming off. It's got 6 points of attachment and epoxy on either side, so the haters can say all they want, those handles aren't coming off. And it's really heavy and it's fun. I'm playing with it. Now I'm getting it sharp, getting that handle worked into place. And every time I do this, I learn more and more. I recently met up with a friend, Kevin Welly. If you guys look at his Instagram page, I met him at the Power Hammer thing. And he had a beautiful knife he brought there. I mean, impeccably designed, absolutely. He didn't have one tooling mark on it. I was like, how do you make something without a tooling mark? I mean, everything I make has evidence of what I've done and how I've done it. He just said hours of sanding. And I just don't have that patience. And I kind of like the tooling marks. I like seeing the evidence of how it was made. Kind of reminds me of primitive tools. And it's also convenient if you're lazy like me to just say, okay, I'm done. And so here I'm getting it nice and sharp. I'm using a 600 grit belt on there. And notice I'm kind of going with the blade itself. That's how I do my final sanding. And then, of course, my final is the buff. The buff gives you that razor sharp feel. A lot of people say, how do you get things sharp? Buffing is the final for me. I can't use stones. I don't do very well with stones. But if you use a buffing like this, and you could strop it a little bit too if you want, but buffing is basically stropping, in my opinion. Send all your hate mail to somebody else, not me. And there, it's sharp enough to shave, and it did shave almost all the way across the entire blade, but I wasn't going to show all that. That was gross enough. And here's my lunch. Just came just in time for me to eat, and the burrito shot across in the room in both directions, and one half stayed in the cup, and that's the one I'm eating. It stayed inside the container. The other one fell on the ground. That one in the full camera stayed in the bucket. And there you go. I was really happy with this build. I learned a lot, and it's going to all go to the bottom line of the next build I do.